Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about how me and 3 of my friends made a whole city building game in only 1 week for the 2025.1 Brackeys Game Jam. This time it actually went really smoothly and we ended up placing 124th overall out of 2,200 submissions, which is a huge improvement from last time. On top of this, we placed 56th overall for innovation, which is actually really surprising and certainly shocked me the most out of the ratings. We also did all of this with no major hiccups, which was honestly such a shocker considering I thought we wouldn't even be able to finish the game in time. But anyway, buckle in as I explain the development process of the game. Before I go further, I actually want to talk about what a game jam is for those who don't know. A game jam is a competition between a bunch of game developers to try and make the best themed game in a set time period. This jam, we had 1 week to make our game, which sounds like not that much time, but if you plan well, it's enough time to make something quite fun and decent. In the Brackeys Game Jam, you were able to vote from a selection of themes, and this time, the community voted on the theme, Nothing Can Go Wrong. Some entries took the theme literally and made a game with no lose condition, and some others took it as being said sarcastically, and that there was something that definitely could go wrong. We went with the latter. On the Sunday night the Game Jam's theme was revealed to all its contestants, my friends hopped into a call and started brainstorming ideas for the game. I can't actually comment much on what ideas we brainstormed because I was busy right when the theme got revealed, but after a quick 30 minutes of trying to desperately get on my computer, I got into the call and was informed that my friends actually thought of a great idea, which I immediately agreed to. The idea we had decided on was not a direct rip-off of anything, but instead a really fun and unique twist on a pretty big genre that you may have definitely heard of, the city building genre. Our idea for the game was to make the player build a town on a sketchy platform that tilts from the way of the buildings. The idea was to make the platform sit on top of lava, and if you let the platform tilt too much, it would fall into the lava and burn everyone and everything. Now that I've sort of set the scene of the idea, I'm going to start talking on the development of the game. On the first night of the jam, we worked on the basic fundamentals of the game so that later development was smoother. So, to begin, I made the game's camera system. We wanted to allow the player to view each little close detail by zooming far in or looking glory at their whole town while zoomed out a bunch. So, I got working on a camera system that could scroll up and down and zoom in and out. At this stage, zooming and scrolling was a bit jank and it wasn't that fun to use, but later in development I did revamp the camera system to make it better, and I'll talk more about that when we get there. I also implemented the very basic frameworks for a day and night system into the game. One of my team members, Nalmesh Games, slapped together a very quick building system, which would be revamped a lot of times later on, but still a very important building block for the game's development. He also slapped together some very quick placeholder sprites, which of course, none of which made the final cut, but still useful for early development. Lastly, he worked on a resources system which allowed the player to gain and lose items. My friend debug.dev worked on making the platform rotate depending on the position of the buildings, and also a little indicator gauge thingy to let the player know how close the platform is to tipping over. Then he proceeded to spend way too long making it so after the platform tips it drops all the buildings off the platform, which was, to be honest, just a silly thing to waste time on early on, but also since we literally removed it later in development because when the platform tipped it caused an absolutely massive lag spike. Anyway, after the small session of progress that Sunday night, we all went to bed. Now, due to school, we were actually quite short on time during the week, but nonetheless, we spent our free time at home working on the game. On the Monday, or the first full day of being able to work on the game, we got quite a decent bit of work done. I spent some of the day making a working, but not very good NPC system for the game. Basically, a worker will be assigned a house and a profession. When a workplace that matches their profession is available, I made it so they just start moving towards their destination with no sort of pathfinding at all. When they arrive at their location, they wait a set amount of time depending on the workstation they're at, do their action, for example at a farm they farm the crops, and then begin walking home. This pathfinding actually brings up a good point that helps explain the idea of the game's platforms. To make the game more fun, you can build platforms to add verticality to your city so that you can fit more buildings on the sketchy platform. This pathfinding that I made completely broke with these platforms though, because when pathfinding to a building on a different level, NPCs would literally just fly because they would move on a straight line to their destination. Anyway, apart from the workers, I started to work on a very basic UI system and a way to interact with buildings in the game. At this stage, the main goal of this edition was to introduce a way to the player to change their workers' professions and introduce a way to specialize the workers that live in houses. I never finished it on the Monday though, so I'll talk more on that later. Anyway, my team also did a bunch of stuff. Debug.dev made the building system on a grid, as previously it wasn't tied to a grid and we thought that it would make more sense and it would just make the game more enjoyable. He also added a way to delete buildings to the build script and added the functionality for the previously mentioned platforms that were used to build up your town. Nullmesh Games worked on a bit of building UI that allowed the player to choose which building they wanted to place down, and made it so placing buildings actually used up the resource in its associated recipe. Finally, Quiddle Studios, our team member who works on art, made a grass, dirt, stone, and an animated lava sprite. That's the list of the main things that happened on Monday, and by this point, to be honest, we actually had done a lot more than I expected. The game was kind of playable in a sort of funny way. Sure, it was absolutely terrible, but you could place buildings and get resources. But the game improved a lot more from here. On Tuesday, or the second full day we had to work on the game, if you ignore school, we got a decent bit done. At the start of the day, I finished the work that I started on making it so you could change the profession of workers. For example, you can turn a lumberjack into a miner if you need more resources from the mines. I also made it so that the workers slow down and eventually die of starvation if they don't have enough food. On top of that, I also made it so workers move into the town automatically, since for the longest time it was just a debug keybind that added one worker to every house in the town, even if the house was full, so it was great to finally fix that. Lastly, I just worked on adding a bunch of workplaces to the game, or basically places that the workers can work at, so the game moved towards a playable state. The notable buildings I added this day were the mines and the refinery. Basically, the mines are self-explanatory, miners go in there, mine stuff, come out of the mines, and the refinery turns 1 coal and 2 iron into 1 steel. On this Tuesday, Debug.dev spent all the time trying to make NPCs actually pathfind instead of just floating to their location, which was honestly a necessary change that needed to be made since the NPCs flying was both goofy and stupid and just didn't look good at all. Nullmesh Games made it so the platform cracks under weight, so that instead of just having to manage the platform tip, you had to manage and repair cracks too. He also added a way to toggle build mode, as we needed a way for the user to be able to interact with buildings, since it was a bit inconvenient whilst in build mode. Today's art additions were a basic house sprite, which we did change later, a mayor's house sprite, a refinery sprite, and a sprite for the buildable platforms. After Tuesday, progress was looking really promising actually, although I was still a bit skeptical since normally by this time it always looks like things are going great until they don't, but honestly, I did have quite a bit of faith that it would all work out in the end. So, I headed to bed eager to wake up the next day and work on the game further. Wednesday was just as smooth as the days prior. On this day, I added robots to the game. Basically, these robots were just going to act as faster and better humans that required no food, but instead just needed to be charged. I haven't explained this yet, but in our Game Jam games we like to include some sort of hidden lore or funny secret from our past games, or just some obvious feature. This time, we used Electrium from our first Game Jam game called Door Defender. If you couldn't tell, it's some sort of electrical ore, but if you didn't catch on, there you go I guess. Anyway, this is an ore or a gem, or something that miners can rarely find in the mines to make technological advances. In this case, it can be used to build robot factories, a place where robot makers live, and robot houses where robots live. The basic idea was that robots were faster and didn't need to eat, but every time a robot came back home, it would take away 1 charge from the house's global battery, which when reaching 0, it would steal 1 of your Electrium to charge back up to 100% so that the robots could still function. No Electrium? No robots. Anyway, on the Wednesday, I didn't actually implement the charging, but all of the other robot functionality was in place, so you could place down a laboratory where robot technicians move in, which then go to robot factories to build robots when robot houses are available. You probably just got lost. Anyway, Nullmesh Games made a day end system, and Debug.dev did nothing because he randomly just got super sick and couldn't do anything on that day. so unlucky I guess. Quiddle Studios made some ore sprites, wood sprites, sapling and tree sprites, and all of the animated worker sprites with different hats and outfits for each worker type. Now that most of the art was in place, the game started to seem sort of finished, which was surprising since we were only halfway through the jam, and since everything seemed sort of polished, we started chucking features onto the game to burn more time, which is where too much of our remaining time was spent. On Thursday, this might become apparent. Debug.dev did a test of the game, and I realized that, oh crap, the game isn't balanced at all, so I spent some of my time balancing the game to make it more fun and enjoyable. On this day, I also finished off the robots by making it so they have to charge at their houses, which was an important addition as if they didn't have this they would be way too overpowered, as they kind of already are even when they do have to charge. I also made it so you could interact with every building in the game so you could view some more information about them, as previously you could only interact with houses to change the living workers' professions, and being able to view some information about other buildings in the game was super useful to the players. No other development work was done on the game on this day, as Nelmesh Games and Debug.dev were both quite sick and took the day off. Quiddle Studios finished all the animated robot sprites and made a bunch of other sprites that were important for the robot revolution, like the robot houses and the factory. Anyway, Thursday was quite a slow day, since as I mentioned, people started having nothing to do, and honestly it was starting to feel that way for me too. Although, for some reason, I just kept pulling crap out of nowhere, so I was a bit confused as to why nobody had anything to do, but it never really became that big of a problem, so I didn't really care that much. Sorry for the disruption, but if you are enjoying this video so far, it would mean a whole lot if you subscribed. I try to make videos every now and then, so some support would mean the world to me. On the Friday, or the last day where school would actually be a problem for us, we started to pick up the pace again. I fixed a lot of bugs to make the game a bit more polished and fun to play. For example, one extremely random bug that we were facing was that after a day ends and you go back to the game scene, every lumberjack would just completely ignore their job and go on strike, which was completely random and annoying, but also really funny, so away that bug went. With my remaining time on Friday, I worked on a very basic and useful system that could be used to make a tutorial in the Inspector of Unity, which actually proved super helpful as the tutorial went through a lot of changes, so being able to edit it freely was quite a nice thing to have. My teammates also got quite a bit done on this day. Debug.dev was still feeling a bit sick, but managed to make some small changes. The most notable one I'll talk about here was revamping our building selection menu, as previously it was a bit bad to use and terrible to look at, so a quick change greatly improved that system. Nelmesh Games added a death screen, a way to repair cracks on the cliff, and changed the building system to give back resources when destroying a building. He also made a few music tracks for the game which all sound super good, which you can go listen to on his music channel called Nelmesh Music. The art additions by Quiddle Studios for today were some crack sprites for the cracking of the platform. Now that Friday was over, we had heaps more time to work on things, and it was mostly time to just polish and balance and playtest the game for a long time. Obviously, you can't do this for too long without going insane, so we made a few tasks up for ourselves to burn time. Most notably, on the Friday night, we thought of an idea where there is an ending to the game in which you build up a nuke and send it off to blow up a big city nearby. And yep, that is where I spent most of my Saturday. Basically, how building the nuke would work is that you would have to build a nuclear bunker which nuke scientists would move into. The role of a nuke scientist is to make a material called nucleum in a nucleum plant that is crafted using a ton of electrium. After 2 nucleum and 100 steel are available, the nuke scientist will go over to the nuke silo to use those resources to build 1 out of 5 pieces of the nuke. Once all 5 pieces of the nuke are built, you can press the launch button and send the nuke to your rival town, Plonkton. Now, is it a bit silly? Yes. But, is it fun to have some sort of ending to the game? Also yes. So, right away I got working on making all the systems for this to work, and after a couple of hours, you could watch your town build up a nuke. At this stage in development, I hadn't added a way for you to actually launch the nuke, but one of my friends did that later, so I never had to worry about it. And with the remaining time I had left, I just balanced the game and fixed some bugs, and those small changes that I did with the balancing made the game so much more fun, so the balancing just ended up being super worth it. Anyway, my team did a lot more small bits here and there. Most notably, Nelmesh Games added a bunch of sound effects, made even more music, which honestly we didn't need, but they were really good, so we didn't really care and we just added them to the game. He also added some particles for cracking, an opening cutscene to the game, and changed the mass of objects to make them rotate the platform differently, as previously every building in the game had the same mass, and it just didn't feel right to have a heavy building weigh the same as a carrot farm or something. The other huge change that was made today was definitely Debug.dev's addition of making the platform lerp when tilting. Previously, it would just teleport to the new rotation when a building was placed, but this change made it so it lerped, or basically just smoothly rotated to the new position, which made the game so much more fun, and also just gave a lot more of the nothing can go wrong feeling that the jam was all about. Lastly, the art we received were the nuke sprites, some better ore sprites, a nuclear bunker, a new sprite for the nuclear scientist, a nuclear silo, and a nucleum plant. And after that Saturday, we were honestly all pretty confident on finishing the game in time, as to be honest it was in a finished state that we could submit for the jam already, but we decided to spend another day just polishing, balancing and playtesting to make the game just that bit better. On the Saturday night, Nelmesh Games got a bit tired and wanted to work on a new system, so he made a very small achievement system, which on the Sunday I picked up where he left off to make achievement functionality. The game currently has 7 achievements, which are Lava, A Growing Labor Force, Workers' Union, I Have Become Death, Robot Uprising, Heinzenberger, and A Full City. I also, on the Sunday morning, polished up the tutorial one last time to try and make it as good as possible to teach the player the very basics of the game. The rest of the time I had, as mentioned, was spent all on bug fixes, polishing, and balancing. Nelmesh Games made a track for the main menu, and added a cutscene to the end of the game for when you launch the nuke to destroy Plankton. Debug.dev made a settings menu and a pause menu for the game, and by this point, the game was finally done. At 6:22 PM, or 38 minutes before the jam's submission deadline, we had made a game that we all thought was fun, without any major hiccups or anything like that, in only 1 week. Now it was just time to wait for our result. In the Brackies Game Jam, everyone is given 2 weeks to play other people's games and give them a rating from 1 to 5 stars in 6 different categories. The categories being enjoyment, gameplay, innovation, theme, audio, and visual. My personal favourite submission that I was able to play was a little game called Flybot, which was super simple and also super effective. I just really liked it. Anyway, after 2 weeks of waiting for the jam results, on a Sunday night at 7 PM, I went onto itch.io expecting an average result, not anything too obnoxious, and oh my god was I blown away when I saw that we placed 124th overall. Compared to our other jam results, it was really good, and I was really proud of our effort. If you want to go play our game, I'll link it in the description, but yeah, I had a ton of fun this jam, and I also just want to say a huge thanks for watching this whole video. I know this was a longer video than normal, but the next video might be about releasing my indie rhythm game called Spin Rhythm. Be ready for that, and I will see you next time.